Hey folks, in today's video we're going to talk about 7 ways that Cyberpunk 2077 has made me a better DM. Hey folks, welcome back to my series called DM Influences, where I talk about how certain media, video games, things like that influence the way that I DM and help me become better. In today's video we're going to talk about 7 ways that the new game Cyberpunk 2077 has made me a better DM. For context, I've sunk about 35 hours into it and I don't think I'm close to being done. It's been a lot of fun. There's a lot of things around glitches and stuff, but overall, I've been playing on the PS5, so I've had no real major bad experiences with it. Mostly good ones, so I'd love to share with you today about how it's made me a better DM and some really amazing things that they've been doing. By the way, for those who are worried, there will be no major spoilers in this video. If you are really worried, of course, you can skip this video. I understand. We'll be covering no major plot spoilers or anything like that. I mainly am going to talk about the mechanics of the game, various things they do, and how you can implement that in your own game. The first way that Cyberpunk has made me a better DM is through their street cred system. For those of you who don't know, in Cyberpunk you accumulate street cred when you do work for various different types of people, when you save people from angry gangsters, things like that, and you accrue street cred, right? And there's actually certain items that are locked behind certain street cred levels. So you have an overall level in a way, and your attributes have levels, but you also have a street cred level that kind of communicates your reputation around the city. And I believe street cred even will eventually unlock new jobs and various things like that. And I love that they have this system. Now, I don't think that it would be a level that I would actually tell my players about in terms of what level they are or what street cred they have, but it's this really cool way of tracking the reputation of your players. The second thing I love about Cyberpunk that's really inspired me is their setting. I think they've absolutely nailed the setting of the Cyberpunk genre. This sort of near future setting that poses lots of interesting questions where people can kind of be or do whatever they want. But with that also brings all the dangers and darkness of that kind of world. The map itself is fairly large, it's fairly wide and expansive, and they give you kind of vehicles and ways to get around, but it's also very tall with multiple different levels and things like that. And I love that they've really filled the world with NPCs and things like that I think are really useful. I think one of the neatest things that ways that challenges me is to have sort of buildings or areas where maybe characters or players wouldn't really explore, but then a quest or something like that sort of forces them to go there or suggests that they should go there, and they get to explore this completely different area. The setting is also backed up by all the various things you can do. By going to various different areas, you can pay for certain services if you want in the Cyberpunk world. You can also experience things like the clubs and the lights and the cities. The third thing that I love about Cyberpunk is the way that they do eye candy. And what I mean by that is things that are really pleasing to the eye or aesthetically amazing that players want. Every so often you're contacted by people about cars they're selling, and usually I'm not a car guy at all by any stretch of the imagination in real life. But in this game, for whatever reason, I want to collect every single car. They're really neat, they're really cool, and they cost a lot of eddies or kind of credits is how Cyberpunk sort of looks at it. And it's this really interesting game where I now start doing a lot of side quests and things like that to try and accrue enough eddies in order to buy cooler, fancier, neater looking vehicles. That's really fun. There's also interesting looking outfits, guns, things like that, equipment that are really fashionable. There's clothing stores. Fashion is a big part of Cyberpunk in both the world and the game. And I think this is a really neat thing for players, As DMs, how do we differentiate between one set of leather armor and another set of leather armor? Or one sword and another sword? Right? I think that providing things that are unique, customizable, or really aesthetically pleasing for players are really neat options. It becomes a sort of mini goal or mini side quest for them to think about, to save for, and then eventually have and kind of show off if we make them really unique and special. The fourth thing is loyalty missions. I really love the relationship building in Cyberpunk. I think they've done a really good job of that. You have all sorts of various different kinds of characters in the game where you build relationships with and you do things for, right? You can start with a simple introduction, but eventually over time they kind of come calling, they come asking for you to help them out with various different jobs and things like that. I think one of the neatest things is that a lot of these characters don't become your sort of companions, right? They don't necessarily join your party or directly help you on your main quest, but they can become very valuable allies, that might help you further down the road. And you can actually really develop their story, and they can become love interests, great friends, things like that sort of in the story. And what I really love about these loyalty missions is that they don't happen right after one another. In some video games for loyalty missions, it's like a one side quest thing. You go and they become your follower or a close friend or love interest. In Cyberpunk, they actually will call you up much later in the game, or at various different parts in the game, sometimes weeks later, to be like, hey V, remember when you helped me out that one time? I need your help again. I think that really sort of encourages and enhances the relationship between you and this character, because it feels very genuine. It's not like you're just helping them this one time for this one thing. No, you're a reliable friend, ally to them, and they're going to call on you over and over again, and you're going to want to help them. And I think that becomes a lot more realistic and really neat, and gives a lot more depth to the story and the problems that they have. The fifth point is this, and maybe some of you do this already. The game reminded me again about it. But there's this really cool system in Cyberpunk where you actually choose what your background is when you start, right? Whether you're a street kid, you're a nomad, or you're a corpo. And this actually provides you different dialogue options throughout the game. So I chose street kid, for example. So I got to have a lot of dialogue options when it came to talking either to corpos or talking to other gangsters or things like that about certain things, right? These options were unlocked to me, but nobody else. And this is a great use, and it really feels like my background actually mattered, in my opinion. Now, I haven't played the game over other playthroughs, but I know for sure that other dialogue options sort of exist. But because of my background, this actually made a really big difference in what I was able to say, who I was able to interact with. And I think that's something that we can utilize more in D&D. Sometimes backgrounds is something that we pick because of the amount of gold they start with, or the attributes that they have, or the little kind of gimmicky thing that they can do. For example, if you're an entertainer, you can, I think, play at the local tavern and get your room for free. Or if you're a pirate or sailor, you can kind of break some minor rules for free. Sometimes backgrounds are simple things like that, but I think in Cyberpunk they actually use backgrounds in a really big way, because your dialogue is actually geared towards your background. There's actually certain dialogue options that other players or other characters wouldn't have. And it then makes it really interesting as to who will approach this person. Right? If you have the background of a sailor and you're at docks, well, if you're going to approach the ship captain, as DMs, we can make that very different than if, let's say, a soldier or a performer or a merchant approaches the ship captain. It would be very different. And I think that Cyberpunk does a really good job of accounting for that and making that feel very meaningful. I think that's something we can do more as DMs. The other thing as well is attributes. Your certain attribute will allow you to unlock certain things. So I have really high body, is what's called, kind of like strength, and engineering. And because of that, one of the things I love doing is that there's these doors that you can see, and for a normal player who has a much lower body, they wouldn't be able to sort of just forcibly open this door. If they're a hacker or something, they might be able to hack into the security systems. My character doesn't do that. My character just likes to brute force it. So I love that I can just kind of rip doors open forcibly if I want to. Or as an engineer, I can kind of tinker with certain things that will really help me in the game. This is a really interesting way that they've made attributes also feel meaningful and unlock different paths that someone with a different playthrough wouldn't unlock. And I think it's the same that we can do with D&D. You can use someone's score, their attribute score, to determine certain things. Once again, maybe if someone has a really high charisma score, then they'll unlock certain options, right? Versus someone who has a very low charisma score. Or maybe if someone has really high intelligence, they can kind of notice things that other people can't because they have a much lower intelligence. I think that's a really neat way that they reward the player for speccing into these attributes throughout the game. My sixth thing is side quests. I think Cyberpunk and CD Projekt Red, of course, do an amazing job of crafting really unique and meaningful side quests. Some that are just as memorable, if not more so, than the main story. Some that I really want to really play through and see through and am really interested about. One of the really unique things about the side quests as well is it's a way for you to farm money, farm street cred, farm reputation, farm gear, farm experience. And I think it's a really interesting way that they've planned the game, right? In terms of, I think you really can play the game back to back if you just go straight through in the main story, but it's probably going to be more of a struggle. And this is something I've been thinking about and might make a video on it later, but whether or not if your players complete side quests and gain more experience, better gear, things like that, maybe you promise a reward right at the end of these side quests, whether it'll help them on their main narrative. Sometimes in D&D, I definitely fall into the trap of having this sort of main narrative or this main sort of line, and then the players kind of complete it and they get rewarded, and then I scale the difficulty based off where they are. But it'd be really interesting to consider whether or not, you know, difficulty maybe doesn't scale based off how strong the characters are. It's already set. And then if characters feel like they're too weak or whatnot, then maybe they can do some side quests to sort of up their experience, up their level, up their equipment, etc. to really help them. That's something I've been really thinking about. I had this one group that I kind of scared away a little bit. I had planned, I'd piqued their interest with some missing dwarves in the tunnels, and then they found out very quickly that it was going to be a mind flayer colony they were going to have to go against, and they decided to walk out of those tunnels. And I was a little disappointed, to be honest, because part of me thought, hey, like, trust me, I'm not going to make it too difficult for you. We're going to make sure it works, but they were afraid. But maybe a side quest or something is for more items or experience, something that I could kind of offer to them, help them bolster up their equipment, their levels, etc., so that they can face this bigger threat. That's an interesting thing I haven't really considered too much in terms of running a game and a story in a campaign. But I think Cyberpunk does that really well. And I feel really good when I've done a bunch of side quests and then I come into the main story and I just kick butt. It's awesome. My final point, point number 7 is this regarding Cyberpunk 2077, is contacts. In the Cyberpunk world, you have a variety of contacts. I think right now I have over 20 different contacts. Some are within the police department, some are politicians, some are what they're called fixers, who are people who offer you jobs. I think the contacts are a really neat part of Cyberpunk. Every so often they'll call you up. They'll say, hey V, like, I have this job, or I have this car, or I have this thing that I need you to do. Are you able to help me do it? And what it does is it creates this really living sense of the world, right? Where they know you're a reliable person. They need work, or they have work, or they need help. And so they're going to call you. Makes a lot of sense to me. Also creates this sense of community, right? You're in this community of fixers, of people in this in Night City who you know. You have different people you can draw on, and actually in various different times along the quests, you can actually call on them, or you have access to them. There's this one quest in particular where there's this fixer I did a couple jobs for, and the main quest I needed to get on this, I need to get into this parade, right? And I said, hey, I actually know this fixer in this part of town who can probably help us, right? And it just gives you this sense of knowing people, right? That your character has done jobs, and people remember that they've done things, and they're gonna ask for them to do more things. And I think that's really neat in terms of building community, building your reputation, building your story and your renown and your street cred throughout your game. I think that's something that I know that I could do more as a DM, that makes the world feel more alive when you have different contacts in different areas that either you can call on to help you, or that can call on you to help them. I think that this makes the world a bigger place. It makes your community within the world more meaningful and bigger. Folks, thanks so much for hanging out with me. These are 7 ways that Cyberpunk 2077 has made me a better DM. Let me know in the comments below if you've played the game, if there's anything that's inspired you, or any tips that you're going to try out. And until next time, keep rolling.